So, hello there, Joe. Thanks for taking time to be part of this very unusual ad hoc interview. As it's not often I'm this forward online, and it turns out that basically, although some people I've spoke to in the past I've known for absolutely years and years, we basically just had a little exchange online around one of my videos, and then we ended up talking. And so I think it would just be interesting to just give the anyone watching this just a quick example of, really, it is one of these things of where it just started off with this video here, which I was talking about sci-fi and tech and creating new products and services. And then really, I am not some big star on YouTube, and yet for some reason 3 days ago you got in touch. We ended up talking, getting into everything, and then I think what's been so great is that from there we've just entered into this rabbit hole of having this big shared connection, a little bit partly due to university, but also other things as well. So anyway, enough about how we got there, but I thought it was just a really nice thing to sort of point out to the viewers that yes, a lot of podcasts and interviews call on long time connections, but actually I love that we're living this serendipity and being in the moment of this madness in the world. And I got to say, it's been great it's so great to have you here. So please take it away.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Jude. I mean, the videos you put up on the science fiction and future possibilities, something that is really kind of personal to me. I love science fiction, and then obviously being a product designer, it fits in really well. So, I mean, for the viewers, if someone's out there putting out videos you like, leave a comment. You just never know where it might lead. Also, reaching out to people on LinkedIn can open up so many more doors for you that you didn't actually think was possible.
Yeah, and I think that's dare I say it. It's sort of sometimes you see sort of things in yourself, in other people at earlier stages of the career, and dare I say, I think I've always had. I think we have a bit of a shared cheekiness to just be like, try our luck and see what happens. So yeah, I think obviously I looked at, after you added me on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, okay, Glasgow School of Art, bit of a connection, really into prototyping, and indeed I wasn't surprised. I wasn't disappointed rather, and I thought it would just be so great if instead of people always hearing me talk about prototyping, I'd love to go through some of your process and find out, a little bit about your journey with materials, user experience, and why you love it.
Yeah, totally. So for me, I am someone that really likes to learn a new skill. So that could be going down to the workshop when we were in university and going on the woodwork lathe, or one of my main projects in university was exploring concrete and how that can be used to make consumer products. So the brief given to us was to make something that could be sold in the School of Art shop. They've got a small shop which sells work from designers who have either graduated or still studying there. So it was something that could be repeatable but had a bit of character. It could be between kind of art, sculpture, product. It was something unusual, but it gave us a real opportunity to explore process and materials. I'll start sharing my screen so that you can see some of the process that I used.
Awesome.
So I think you should be able to see an orange bucket with some brown mush in it.
Yep.
Yeah, and then we've got a basin and some balloons. And this was really just about using a material that I'd never worked before. I looked up some YouTube videos on things that work for some people and started just playing around. So as you can see, you've got some concrete just resting on a balloon there, held up by a couple of cups. And then what happens if you do that for a while and you flip it upside down and have the balloon facing upwards? What would the result be? And what we got out of there was some pretty nice candle holders. So once you pop the balloon, you're left with this bowl shape and then this almost kind of volcanic flow. But the main kind of interest for me was the finish on the surface and the difference between the outside that's all rugged and the inside, which is fairly smooth. And then I mean, that's not such a repeatable process. The concrete was quite brittle, so I decided to try and explore how we could make this a little bit stronger structurally, and to have more consistency. We happen to have these big polystyrene vacuum formed dishes in the studio, 2 of them. So I put a little bit of concrete in and then used a kind of compression mold technique just to push that out. So some clamps, a big bag of sand, and then concrete trapped between 2 hemispheres. And what you got out was a little bit more uniformity. It was a lot stronger, and it made a kind of a prettier dish. So I'd gone down the right path, but it still wasn't where I wanted it to be as a product. It needed to be a lot stronger, and it could be more interesting. And I really wanted to explore more of the surface finish on this inside to see if I could make it really smooth. So I can't really remember how I ended up making it. I just added a lot more material in here and started dyeing, but it completely disintegrated around the sides.
Wow.
So
why is it black?
It was black, so it's black marbled. So I just got some pigment for the concrete and mixed it with the natural kind of white concrete. Snowcrete it's called.
Yeah.
And then after it broke, I glued it back together in some parts, and it ended up being this rugged, misshapen, but quite nice piece. And the outside of it was polished smooth, just naturally. I mean, that's one of the smoothest surfaces I'd seen. Almost like glass on top there. So I knew I was going definitely in the right direction. But I needed to get something which didn't break and was more consistent. So I decided I would make 2 purpose-built hemispheres of the plastic vacuum formed. And to do that, I would need to turn 2 kind of negative molded shapes on the lathe to have the inside concave of the bowl and the outside concave. So that's the inner surface, and then that's the outer surface next to the inner surface on a vacuum sheet. And then we've got these 2 parts. Cut away the bottom of the bowl where it would be, and that can be where we pour in, and then I've just sealed up round the sides. And you get out this very smooth surface on the inside of the bowl, and then it transfers to a rugged surface. What we've got here is some flashing, for want of a better term, around the outside. And that's just where the water would escape. So eventually I kind of refined it a little bit more, added more sealant around the edges so there was less flashing. And you got a much more defined edge, and you got this kind of lip effect. And then I could explore the patterns on the inside by pouring alternatively white and black concrete. And eventually produced a whole series of these, which were sold. One of the greatest things about it is that it's really repeatable once you've got the molds. It's really cheap as a material, and it's quite easy to explore pattern with. So here's just this is almost like a day's work of just pouring different colours in for different molds. You get that with some paint. Instead of a pigment colour, I used kind of like an oil-based paint, and that offered a totally different surface texture wherever the paint was. And then eventually I had a smaller mold which totally failed at this part. For some reason the concrete didn't flow, but this is ultimately my favourite of all the ones I produced because it has this one-of-a-kind defect. And if we go back, I mean, it all kind of comes from this model here being so ugly and totally broken, but it really served as a great learning experience, making such a polished surface, making something larger, and just kind of exploring materials. So that's the kind of concrete side. It was a great opportunity to just buy a large bag of material and then just explore wherever it could go. It's really messy if anyone's going to do it at home. Make sure you have a lot of newspaper on hand, but it's so easy to make stuff just around your house. I don't know, if I stop sharing the screen, you might see me a little bit larger.
Well, sadly me as well, but it's absolutely beautiful work. And I think if anything, it's kind of inspiring that I felt this as someone who studied chemistry first before I did product design. And whilst I was learning about how to make a lot of just white powders, which was a little dull, I ended up getting drawn into the neighbouring university, an art college, to do ceramics. And so I got into so I was actually using my chemistry skills to make better ceramics, an artistic, in quotes, thing. And yet it feels like you're doing almost exactly the same thing and I think if anything, the reflection is we spend so much time putting things in pigeonholes, but actually good artists understand science, and good scientists have a degree of artistic flair to the way they approach a problem.
Completely.
And so I love that. For me, it feels like your work's inseparable, from the disciplines.
And but when I worked during my time at university, I worked in a bar, and our main regular was this master ceramicist who didn't do chemistry but understood all of the elements that were required for different ceramic processes, whether it was making glazes, the amount of iron oxide you'd need to get a percentage of red in there, and just all of this information was stored in this guy, but it was all trial and error. I mean, he had just bought different amounts of minerals and had seen what works, what didn't. He'd blown up a few kilns in his time, but it was about exploration for him. And he went into every day loving what he did because he was hands-on and because he was always trying things that were new.
No, I mean, and it's so fascinating because I feel like, was just to clarify for the listeners here that this wasn't part of your main job, should we say, not to diminish it, but it was something you very deliberately did as an open-ended exploration. And I think one of the things I've sort of been asked a lot by students when I visited universities is, what's all this about a side hustle or projects? If I'm supposed to be a designer, I should be doing design all the time. And I think there's almost a sort of emphasis of you go, well, look, you can pick almost any of the greats in history, like Einstein, and his side passion was playing the violin. Yeah. And I feel like, when you dig around, it's really helpful, I find, also when you're working on a very tight brief. Sometimes having something that's totally different really loosens you up and gets you going again.
Yeah. And actually, a lot of your experience of the outside world, outside of design, is where you get ideas for, if you're a product designer, for products. I did my final year project completely on the bar industry because I'd spent 5 years working there. And so I already had lots of contacts, I already had a great deal of knowledge, I had places I could test, people I could use for user testing. And I knew so many problems that existed there because I'd spent 5 years in something completely detached from design that is real world.
So this is actually I think this is such an interesting bit of the conversation for me, because on the one hand, your final year project definitely benefited from you finding a genuine problem, and you didn't run the risk of the classic thing, which of course happens to some students, and it's mortifying when it does, when you think you're solving a really important thing and then you get out into real life and you realize actually it doesn't matter at all. And I say that with some acknowledgement with my own final year project. It wasn't quite that doom and gloom. Basically what you might call the desirability of the medical device that I designed, clinicians, all these people wanted it. In terms of could it be made, feasibility, it absolutely could. In terms of viability of the business, the big shock for me, and this is why, you can never interview enough stakeholders within the whole entity of the business, not just the people who buy it. The interesting thing was, it wasn't that doctors didn't like it. It wasn't that the sales teams didn't like it. But when I spoke to, and I'm not going to name names because it was advice given to me with very, very good sincerity and care, but nonetheless a reality check, that this tube that went down your throat, which I had designed an improvement for, it was only really, the defect was only responsible for about 100 deaths in the UK per year. Now, the death of one, of course, is a tragedy. I'm not in any way undermining that. But when you look at how many other diseases, illnesses, defects within surgery cause thousands upon thousands of deaths, in contrast, like this didn't even like make a scratch in terms of like the business case. And so I think, this is something, if it's a bit of a long ramble, forgive me, but it's interesting to know, when is it that for you it was really helpful to completely know everything about the business for your final year project, but then simultaneously you're also someone who goes into things like molding stuff out of concrete without clearly any idea what you're doing, and you go for it. And I suspect both of them have pros and cons, and it'd be great to hear you, what you felt about them.
So the concrete thing was great. I've got an example actually. So this was like because I had too much concrete, and then this is a large yogurt pot in the centre and a smaller yogurt pot, and just pressed down. And I mean, that costs probably about 50 pence to make, but you can sell that for like £20. And it's just a great way of kind of exploring something, but you can also make a little bit of money off of it. And then in terms of the final year project, I can probably share my screen again and talk people through it a little bit. So what you should see is a kind of mobile bar. So this is my final year project at Degree Show, and this kind of came out of me doing an entire summer of being on a bar outside and having to pack it down every night.
Yeah.
And put it away and then unpack it, as this was for around a month. So it became really laboursome, and especially at the end of the night, it was the last thing you wanted to do was to move sections of a bar and everything that was encompassed in that. If it was fruit, if it was stock, if it was ice, it just became such a chore after shift. But then also, having just set one up, the last thing you wanted to do was spend some time actually serving people because you were knackered.
Yeah.
So what I decided to do was look at the ergonomics of this. This is like a slight show on how easy it is to prototype some things. I mean, this was just to look at what the limitations were. Height-wise, we had 2 people in our class which were representative of the 5th percentile. A girl who was really small and a guy who was extraordinarily tall. So it was really easy for me to just check to see if it was easy for a small person to reach the top height, but also for a tall person to reach things that were much lower. Just a chair which can move up and down provided very quick results in just checking the heights for a speed rail. And this was like, I can't even tell you how valuable it was to quickly make this, to check some heights before actually creating a larger scale prototype. Because once I started on that prototype, it was going to be really difficult to go backwards and change things. What I ended up doing was sketching it out, making it in CAD only quickly so that I could see where the joints were. Once again, I was not a carpenter. I'm still not a carpenter. This was a heavy carpentry project in the early days because it was easiest to make things out of wood. Made myself a great cutting list. It's the whole mantra of measure twice, cut once. And if you've got a great cutting list, it's going to save you a lot of time. But then just spending maybe 2 weeks in the workshop building something up that could actually go out and be tested and be shown to people in industry that I'd made all these contacts with. So early days, I managed to fit by the millimetre into the back of a taxi. Which was
that intentional or by luck?
It was. I mean, I'll tell you now it was intentional, but at the time it was completely by luck. 2 taxi drivers refused to take me, and then in Glasgow, 2 taxi drivers pulled up and they're like, yes, let's see if we can fit this in. It was a great kind of like balance to see who was the cheekiest taxi driver and who would actually take me down. But it got displayed at a whiskey industry and got great feedback from people there. And it was great to have people who are actually in charge of the purchasing of materials like this, and who are involved in setting up events where it is about speed. I mean, you're in event halls and you're maybe only allowed in there an hour before. So if you can just so the idea is that you would wheel this whole thing in and it would already contain all the materials you need. And you just set up from there. It doesn't mean you have to go down to a van to pick up the bar itself and then bring boxes of materials separately. It's all contained in this one thing. So yeah, that's it in use. I'll just go back to the first slide. So I mean, back to the point on kind of the business side, is that this was great. In fact, I knew there was a demand for something like this. So it came out of speaking to people at these events, and they kind of helped to form the brief at the start. And then it went on and continually going back and checking, is this what the kind of thing that you would buy? Is this the kind of thing you would buy? I went back with one idea and they were like, no, you're so far off. And then came back with this and they were like, actually, this is like really something that we would prefer. And then I used CAD effectively later on in combination with the technical report that you have to do alongside the kind of design report, and seeing what it would be like if it was made from metal instead of wood, and doing kind of engineering analysis to see where the strengths, where the weaknesses were, what the limitations were, and then eventually how small it could be, how light it could be. So it was a great project in terms of it got me into the workshop a lot. I loved building it. It's a magnificent piece at Degree Show. Everyone was interested in coming up to see the cocktail bar. I got to spend a lot of time during my final year in cocktail bars testing all this stuff out. But it was also good because it was very closely tied to working with industry.
And I think that's such an interesting thing of that. I know certainly one of the dilemmas tutors always face is, and I know this was debated heavily when I was there, as I spent a year in Norway, and the two institutions have different, viewpoints on it, which may of course have evolved since I was a student. But the short of it is that if you bring industry in and they write a very, very constraining brief and are too heavy-handed with the students, then you basically get quite mediocre work that you think, well, you could have just waited till they graduated and, would they have got a job in it? On the flip side, if you don't have any industry, you tend to design stuff that's just, basically art. And of course, art has its place. But essentially, I think it's a fair distinction between artists ultimately following a journey of self-exploration, whereas I think designers are a little bit more beholden to trying to find a market or an opportunity or a particular type of user interaction. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but running with that point, I think it's really interesting how you did manage to listen to industry, but at the same time produce something that hadn't really been seen before. And I think that for me is a hell of a success story to sort of get that balance right. I wondered whether, all well and good and high five, and I know we tend to sort of, as you implied with the taxi fitting, is there anything that you kind of go, well, of course I said that at my degree show, but in truth, these were some of the hard learnings and mistakes along the way, that you really had to sort of challenge yourself of whether you were bringing bias or other things that was, should we say, less professional to the table?
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole discussion around it being an actual something for the alcohol industry as a problem point for the art school. So originally I was going to serve drinks at Degree Show, and then they were like, oh, this is actually maybe not appropriate. And we were like, but there's a bar downstairs. I mean, you can get a drink at Degree Show. This is like a proof of concept. And they were like, oh, and then there was a kind of ethical debate about actually designing stuff for the alcohol industry. With the design itself, the kind of analysis I did on the structure of it was in no way complete by the time I had presented at Degree Show. So there were a lot of kind of liberties that had assumed or made up featured. I mean, there's only so far you can go in CAD modeling of something to prove it as a concept. So I'd proved it worked in wood, complete overkill. I mean, this thing was structurally sound. You probably could have dropped out a window and it'd be fine.
I can see
It's
the
a
dowel
beast.
pins. Yeah.
Yeah. But on the CAD model, I was like, right, let's try and make it as light and as thin as possible. And it worked in simulation, but there's so many problems that would have arisen from actually manufacturing it that I probably can't even see now. I had originally designed it to be welded together, but I knew very little about actual welding techniques, so I wasn't sure about tolerances on that. The final design of it was in metal, but there was no I hadn't done like a metal frame to show how that would work. And basically, one of the main drawbacks about university is that there's a deadline, which kind of exists in real life, but doesn't actually, where something has to be handed in and delivered, even if it's not reached its completion. So I had a visual representation and I had a simulation representation, but those were both of different stages of the project. They weren't of the same finished article. So I wish that I had mainly the time to go and actually learn how to weld this together myself and make what I was pitching as the product. And then also a lot of feedback was it would have been great if you designed it to be compacted when it was in storage. And that is something that I really wanted to explore. But once again, I mean, we're only working on this for maybe 6 to 8 months. So it's a short time to go from inception to complete conclusion by the end of that. So there's still so much more work that needs done on this project. But it looked very pretty at degree show, so I was happy with that.
And I guess you could say that there's always that fork in the road of do you go try and sell this thing now because it's awesome and there's a market, etc., or is it ultimately a communication of your skills that help you get employed? And I always think that's should we say elephant in the room isn't the right word, but it feels like it's a taboo to talk about when you're in a degree show. So I mean, with mine, I patented it. I tried to license it. The fact that I realized the, should we say, naivety of my understanding of the true dynamics of the industry. I think I can beat myself up about it if I like, but actually if I apply the fact that I knew nothing about these sorts of things compared to what I know with hindsight, I think it was fair. And having been an employer of graduates myself, I think that's the sort of thing you give students a pass, right? There's absolutely no point saying, why aren't you also an expert welder? I think for me, the most valuable thing is as long as you're in an interview saying, I know nothing about welding. In hindsight, I really should have gone and, bought some coffee and biscuits for a local welder, told him how to, asked him for a critique of my design and learnt through it. And I think that I think is really all employers are looking for. So I guess while we're on that subject, could you talk a little bit about the transition you had from degree into gainful employment?
Yes, so I work for a company right now called Drown Audio, but the route to that job, I actually ended up working in the bar industry for kind of 10 months after graduation, not really knowing what to do, applying for some jobs and getting really good responses back, but ultimately not being successful. Still continuing on with the concrete business to have a little bit of a side income, and meeting up with friends generally to have kind of design discussions and little brainstorms, but a lot of them just didn't go anywhere. Eventually applied for a job because I had had a talk in our final year by my current employer now, a man named David Law, who Jude also used to work for, which is a small connection for us both. So I'd seen him talk in our final year at university, and then saw him put up a job opportunity. So I jumped at the chance for that. It was almost Christmas. I think it was maybe the 20th of December. He phoned me and asked to do a phone interview, and I was like, I actually really want to do an in-person interview, so I'll come to you. I kind of pushed him for that because, I don't know, I'd never done like a full phone interview, and I feel like I come across better in person. So eventually got one arranged for the 22nd of December. Went along, met him, ended up chatting for 2 or so hours about product design, about where I see myself now, where I see myself in the future, and both of our kind of plans for the future aligned fairly well. I ultimately want to start my own design studio that kind of focuses on multidisciplinary design, but also avoids a need for a lot of talent to go to London to find purposeful design jobs. So try and keep some talent up in Scotland, and do something that's really interesting and kind of make a name for Scottish design, like Scandinavian design is a really big thing. So our kind of career paths align. So I started working for him just over a year ago now for a startup named Drown Audio. So we specialise in earphones. These aren't our earphones, these are headphones. But I'm only using...
Oh, you'll be burnt at the stake for that.
I know. I'm only using them because they're Bluetooth and they offer a better mic up situation for this. I swear.
Version 2, though.
Version 2, that's it. That's what I'm working on just now. So what was great about that was that he knew I was a graduate. So there's a good saying that we have and that some of my lecturers have, is that when you come out of university, you think you know everything, and you get into your first job and you realise you know absolutely nothing. And so this was me going into a job for the first time ever, into a field of audio which I knew completely nothing about, and also never having worked in a design studio or a engineering practice, being both the product designer and the engineer, just kind of completely in at the deep end. But David's a kind of really culturing individual, so he set me up with everything I needed, said you need to just kind of research everything that we have done over the past few months and everything in the field, and I'll set you targets every week, and if you hit those targets, we'll both learn lots about audio and lots about what we need to do, and we'll get this product launched. And also he's been teaching me more about the business side as well, so it's a really, for me, I think it's a perfect, great first job to be part of a startup with someone who's done multiple startups before, has led successful companies before, but also being kind of the main product designer and engineer. There's a huge amount of responsibility. So I'm kind of responsible for all the prototyping, all the testing, all the contact with our manufacturers, whilst also we contract out to a couple of industrial designers who help us a little bit more with the ID side. And most of the kind of technical side is nailed down by now. So it's a good mix of dealing with contractors, dealing with manufacturers, having someone above me that really knows his stuff, that can help me and helps to educate me, but also pushes me, not just in the workplace environment, but also personally. He's always telling me to keep these side hustles going and to sell. I had so much concrete stuff I hadn't sold, and he was like, well, what are you doing? Where's your marketing strategy for this? And I was like, you're my boss on that side. But ultimately, he was trying to get me motivated to kind of further that bit. So it's been a great experience for me.
But I mean, this is why I have, nothing but respect for David, as it's actually very rare to have a boss who realizes that there is actually a sort of mutual benefit from a side hustle. Now, that is not to confuse a side hustle that is distracting, where you're at risk of basically just exploiting the company and you're always handing in work late, or it's substandard, or your boss just truly feels that you weren't pushing yourself. But I think I've also been very lucky that, for example, I was working at Suguru whilst doing stuff for the BBC on Big Life Fix, and my boss truly understood that it was not the same part of my brain that was being, should we say, squeezed for resources. That when you're trying to sort of produce something that's very visual and like a documentary, it's very different. At the time, I was trying to scale up the manufacturing from putting things in pouches by hand to fully automated. And yet the irony is, I ended up producing this small video with the team that was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but actually used all the communication skills that I had learned from doing the documentary. And it just went down a storm. I mean, it was like a standing ovation in the company when we showed this little video, and it was about how to make an industrial mixer for basically something that feels like bubblegum. And never in your dreams would you have gone into the position saying this is going to be great for your boss. But I think he just always had that faith that things do come full circle. And I know, having actually the shared connection, for anyone who hasn't stalked David Law on LinkedIn, is that in his past he founded Speck Design, and I actually interned there in California. And it feels like nothing has changed. His ethos, his attitudes towards mentoring and pushing young people. And I guess if I was to sort of sign off here a little bit, I would say that, one of the important things for a graduate is not just getting a really cool job with a cool name, but looking for a place where you think, I really think I'm going to have a good manager, a good boss, because it is night and day in how your future will pan out. So I wondered, would you mind sort of talking a little bit, about yourself, or indeed not mentioning any names, but any contrasts with your peers that you think might be some sage advice for young graduates?
Yeah, so I personally, one of the first jobs I had coming out of school was to be a bathroom designer, so interior design. And the boss there was a plumber by trade and was known as being an excellent plumber, the kind of the Gordon Ramsay of plumbers in Edinburgh, but also had the temper of a Gordon Ramsay of plumber. So you were terrified of making mistakes. And then the reverse of that with David is, let's make all the mistakes. Let's find all the mistakes possible. Let's make them. Let's learn from them. And it was a very strange kind of total twist of my previous life as a small designer in an interior design studio, with this as my first job as a product designer. And as a kind of graduate and as an employee, I would now always seek to work in a company that kind of loves to make mistakes and that can embrace that really easily. So I used to have a real fear of doing first prototypes because I didn't think they'd be right. There's kind of everything has to be perfect in CAD before you can prototype it. Whereas now at Drown, it's like, let's print it, let's test it, let's change it. Let's print it, let's test it, let's change it. Let's just make small incremental changes so that we know what we're changing. But don't be afraid if it doesn't work or if it looks stupid, then we'll be fine. One of the first times I did like a kind of critical review, I had to produce, or David sent me a challenge of producing 5 ideas, 2 of which I knew were crap, and 3 which I thought were viable. And so presenting these, I was like, oh, there's this one and there's this one. And he was like, you don't sound enthused about that. And I was like, yeah, because I know they won't work. And he was like, so why are you doing it? And I was like, oh, to hit that 5 target. He's like, if there aren't 5 ideas, then there aren't 5 ideas. Just say that there's only 3 because there's only 3 ways of doing it. And I was like, oh, so I can actually tell you that I don't think I should do that work if there's a legitimate reason. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that, there's that. Also, would you say that sometimes you have to have someone who's honest with you to tell you that it's okay?
Yes,
it's not at any point that I think youth is entitled to be arrogant, but I think it is sometimes entitled to say, I don't understand why I'm doing this. You've asked me to do something. I'm trying to do it out of respect, but I just don't understand it. And I think that does deserve an honest answer from a boss, to say, well, yeah, you're right. Fair point.
And also, if you don't think you can challenge your boss, then he's probably not or he or she is probably not the best boss for you. I get a lot of reward out of challenging ideas for both. So David's our CEO, but we've also got a founder as well. So both of these gentlemen are my boss kind of equally. And so we have heated discussions sometimes, but ultimately it's to make the product better. All of us have a shared appreciation and love for the product, and all of us have valid ideas. Just sometimes they might be opposing. So there's always compromises that need to be made. But unless you're willing to stand up for your ideas and take critical feedback on them, then you're going to do well. But if you're not prepared to stand up for your ideas, then they'll never get the light of day, and it'll be a shame in the long run.
So there's an interesting point that you just made about if I'm going to seize on it is one about getting valuable feedback. Now, I've gone into lectures and told students, and I guess I'm wondering, and this is don't appease me, don't agree with me just for the sake of it. But one of my pet irritations is that if you present something like a 3D printed model or a CAD rendering, there's something in the brain of even good designers that it makes it hard to critique it in a way that isn't sort of respectful of the evident work that's gone into it. Whereas if you rock up with a bit of cardboard and some gaff tape and some bendy straws and lollipop sticks, no one has any issue or politeness to explain, what is the potential or why that bit isn't working. And so I just wondered, could you talk a bit on, because I think a lot of students worry about this a lot, of saying my folio has to look gorgeous, has to look like Apple or Johnny Ive. And I think that's fine when you've got 30 years of experience behind you. But when you're trying to get your first job, am I talking rubbish?
I completely agree. So it's been a kind of great excuse of mine. I'm producing poor prototypes under the premise, I'll get good feedback there. But there's a good balance you can make of getting something that represents what you're talking about, but it does need to take a lot of time. Even you mentioned cardboard models, but I've seen people painstakingly make the most beautiful cardboard model for days and days and days, and you can see lecturers hesitant in giving them honest feedback, because ultimately that time, once it's been made and critiqued, that time's gone. So if you spend a quarter of the time but you can still visually represent what your concept is, that's so much more valuable than something that looks beautiful. Even hand sketches, I've got friends that can make beautiful renderings really quickly, and that is a skill that I wish I had personally. But I also have friends who, well, like me, if I want to make a beautiful render, it's going to take me a long time. So I don't, if I'm just sketching ideas. There's no point in me spending time rendering that till it looks impeccable and it looks like something that I could put on the zine or a website. It's not going to serve me the purpose until maybe I'm getting down to the marketing side. Something's about to be sold, and then I go back and I say, here's one of my beautiful renderings from right at the start, even though I did it right at the end.
But I think that's an interesting subtlety, is that I don't think either of us are saying there is no place for having artistic flair, rendering, beautiful prototyping skills. Of course there is. It's just recognizing there's a time and a place, but also an audience. I think what was unusual when I look back at Dyson is that the marketing people who I had the fortune of interacting with were just extraordinary at being able to see terrible work in progress prototypes and mentally transport themselves to they had faith that it'll look the part when it gets there.
Yep.
But I would not say that is true of all industries and all disciplines. And so turning up with a yogurt pot and a paperclip, to the wrong agency or the wrong consultancy group is a terrible idea as well. So I think there's always a balance.
I think the key is thinking about, number one, what it's for, and who it's for. So what are you trying to represent, and who are you trying to represent it to? If I'm representing something to David, it can be kind of hokey, we like to use. It can be not the finished article, but if I'm presenting something to our founder who hasn't got a design background, it has to be a little bit more refined so that I can explain it in a way where it isn't just a 2D stickman drawing on a piece of paper, or it isn't just like a paper clip in a yogurt pot. It has to actually look like it will so that someone can understand that. I had that a lot when I was in the bathroom industry, is that we would all speak on a kind of plan layout view, just about where things would go, but the clients did not understand these kind of two-dimensional wireframe drawings. They were like, where's my bathroom? And so you'd have to then represent that visually in a way that a layman could understand.
And I think it's quite interesting how you see companies like, you're probably familiar with the IKEA AR app, where you would hold your phone up and you could basically drag in a sofa, and it would augment reality, put that sofa pretty accurately in your room, and also try and light it vaguely close to what the lighting is already in the room. And of course, it's buggy and it's glitchy, and there's all sorts of criticisms you can throw at it. If you judge it by the lens of like a professional game, then of course it's not anything. But if you see it as a sort of legitimate, tool that is much better than a pencil sketch, and certainly a lot better than a technical drawing that's meant for an architect's profession. I think it's an incredible tool, and I think we will probably start to see more of those things appearing. Like you've seen, I'm sure, augmented reality for clothing, where you can stand in front of almost like a virtual mirror and think, oh yeah, that does look good from different angles. I'm yet to have upped my game on style and my wardrobe, but one day. But I kind of feel like all these try before you buy experiences. There's something I find very interesting about prototyping from all these different industries is everyone always thinks the big leap is going to be titanic and earth-shattering, and actually it's usually drip, drip, drip.
Yeah.
When completely. I see things like IKEA, I'm like, ooh, that's the first drip. And then I see it in clothing, and then I see it, Lego's done one with the boxes years and years before that. And so I think AR is coming, but it just hasn't had this like road to Damascus epiphany. And I think maybe it never will for a long time.
No, it'll be, I think it will be a kind of reflective, where we'll be 20 years in the future and we're like, oh, remember when in 2020 we thought that would never be possible, and now it is. Oh yeah, and then you've had maybe 15 or so different products gradually making that process become a reality. But it's never that you're going to ultimately have a Google Glasses and then everything can be fed into that. It is completely a journey that takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of prototypes. It takes a lot of failures. It takes a lot of, hopefully not, but usually companies which start up and go bust that other companies can learn from. But without that process continuing, you would never get the final result.
Yeah, and I think that is it's dare I say it, I found myself, even weirdly without getting too meta, doing a project where I've been asked to think, how would I talk to students? The irony is I've done the project and parked it, and actually this thing of talking to people like yourself, that evolved separately as a sort of side thing that I thought, I'm tired of thinking about what I think. I want to see what other people think and bring that to the community. So I guess if it's not too much of a jump in flow, it would be nice to know your opinion. And I'm not expecting you to be the oracle here, but given the circumstances that we're in, as regards COVID-19, I'm sure people are still watching this thinking, well, yeah, it's all right for you two, Jude, with your 10 years experience, and you with your secure job with a great mentor. But how would you sort of, because you're closer, should we say, to the memory of it, how would you view the present situation I'm not saying that it's rose-tinted and all perfect, but how would you seek opportunities in adverse circumstances like now?
I mean, I completely agree that we we have a kind of unrivaled position where we actually have a career just now, and a lot of people coming out of university probably are quite scared, maybe quite confused about what the opportunities are. It isn't the same kind of career advice that the previous generations would have received. And so, speaking from my experience and building on the experience of a few friends I've got who actually aren't employed just now, but are in isolation, it's hard. It's hard to look at things like you usually would about applying for a job, applying for a grad job. You don't know if they're hiring or not. I mean, I would still apply for jobs for places that are hiring. We're hiring an intern, so we're in the process of looking at CVs and portfolios, and hopefully we're going to hire someone. It might be that they have to kind of remote work for a while, and then we eventually get them into the studio once this has died down a little bit. But you have to kind of be fluid in your working style. But if you are trapped at home, I would think about things you can do at home and think about how a company might operate. Maybe you pick a few companies that you would like to see yourself working at. I've still got companies in my mind that I want to eventually work for, that I kind of try and do any side project to kind of please them and in their way of working. So if, for example, I'm gonna make a little monitor stand for this computer, so I'm gonna have a look, see what companies I would want to work for, and then see which kind of aesthetic and what process style, and then make something for myself rather than buy something off the shelf. So that's quite a simple little project. I've got friends who are just working in their house, have bought a sewing machine. In fact, I've got some examples of it, so I can share my screen.
Please do. I just paused it for a minute to get your face, but
that's fine. So they bought a bunch of fabric, have a sewing machine in their house. Their girlfriend sews avidly, so they thought they would give it a try. They've got a lot of time on their hands, they aren't employed, and they're obviously trapped indoors. So for me, it's about thinking creatively about what you can do with your hands, what projects there are out there, and then also kind of what you need. Instead of buying something, you've seen something online you really like, you're like, actually, could I make that? Could I learn a new skill? So this person has had 2 quite small bits of fabric, but has wanted to create himself a little pencil roll, which is something that I've been wanting to have myself as well. So after he did this process, captured it all, captured his working, his design thoughts. Here's a mistake. I mean, what he learned was that he thought that the fabric would sew like you would draw on a piece of card. It would be straight and level, but actually when it gets pulled into the machine, it twists and it bends and it buckles. So he'd never worked with it. It's a great opportunity to learn what the kind of ins and outs of working with fabric is like.
I love that they had the courage to share that. It's really I say this to someone who literally is sitting next to a sewing machine myself, and it takes a long time to learn the craft.
Yeah, so I mean, this is just maybe a week's work, and has made himself a nice, attractive little pencil roll. And so I'm going to order one from him. I don't know what he's going to charge me for it.
But we're going to put a link in the bottom of this. I feel we ought to. I feel this is the time to kick back. So, it's really nice colour choice as well. That's love it.
So what I was wanting to do was kind of encourage him to get some like waxed cotton, because I fancy mine being in waxed cotton. So even if I supply the materials and he makes it, and then I can pick a custom layout for the stuff that I've got. We chatted earlier about it would be great if there was space for a set of kind of veneers, calipers, because they're such a nightmare to travel around with. They're sharp, they're a very odd shape, they often rip things in your bag. So that is one example. I've got another one. I'll have to stop share and then maybe reshare.
But I think while you're just getting that link, it's just nice to bring these examples, back to students to go, I can honestly say, having done these projects myself, but also hired people, I actually look for these things in folios. If I see someone who's just like, I do one thing and nothing else, then in some ways I'm always thinking you should probably just go start up a business doing that one thing. But if you're saying that you're truly an industrial or product designer, I think the title implies that you are kind of a gun for hire. You're someone who can have any brief and apply the design thinking process to it, be it in this case lighting, be it pencil rolls, be it surgical equipment, whatever. And so I think it shows versatility, even if it isn't a big, heavy final year 9-month project. I think, I can't stress it enough that I've not really heard any employers say that they don't love seeing these little curiosity things, obviously in an appropriate ratio to some deep dives.
Yeah, completely. There's a space for uni work, but I would love to see real world actual development of something that's either personal to you or like a bit of fun, but it just shows that you're willing to jump into a different field and have a little play around, have a little prototype, learn some new skills. I mean, so this was a combination of two friends who weren't employed at the time, so it was straight after university, so they decided to take an object in their home and explore a design that could be created through people that were local to them. So they weren't allowed to outsource manufacturing outside of the city of Glasgow, and they had to be able to build and construct the prototypes themselves. So they chose a lamp, and the first prototype was using a milk carton and a lamp that they already had. So that's it, working as a pendant lamp. And from that, they decided what the form might be. So little cardboard models. And this is great because this is models you definitely can critique.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to when they eventually see this video and can hear me slating it. But I mean, really easy, really fast. You get to see size and geometry. You get to
and
see
I guess if I can interrupt, I can tell you as someone further down the line, I don't just, to be honest, I'm like, yeah, sure, cardboard, great. I do cardboard every day. What I pick up on is just the evident passion and chaos that's on that floor. That it's not precious. I mean, don't get me wrong, takes one to know one. That's a very carefully placed sketchbook in shot. So I know that's been staged. But I tolerate it because overwhelmingly the rest of it isn't fake. It looks like they were really having a great time. And at the end of the day, you want to hire someone and you want to work with someone who has a great time doing stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what I see in this photo. So yeah, all power to them.
Totally. I mean, not precious about anything.
Slightly dangerous.
Slightly dangerous. That's just a piece of paper around that, but it gives you a good indication of what could be. And then they used the local laser cutter. Might not be something people have access to now. I've been getting stuff laser cut by someone local and they've just been posting it to me. So that's been pretty lucky for me. But I mean, there are other methods you could use for this. And then just a kind of quick assembly with some card gives a little bit more indication. And then eventually here's a good example of some shots of here where kind of failed prototype. Here's what worked, here what didn't work. That's actually my rabbit they were looking after. So hopefully it never got caught up in all the mess. But then you've got some kind of nice final product shots on what could be an actual retail lamp. And there's it at the side. So it had two function. One is a kind of ambient light, one is a more of a directional light. But it was a really good project for them to show off some skills, to show that they can think really quickly. I think they only spent maybe a week or 2 weeks on this project total, but managed to show off the kind of the prototyping skills they had and have a lot of fun doing it. I mean, if you're not having fun as a designer, why are you being a designer? It might be stressful at points, but have fun with it.
And I think maybe what's interesting is you joked and said like, oh, here's me slating it, northern term there to be giving it bad critique.
Yeah.
But I think what as well is that the fact that they were trusting you to go put this on something which would go public. I already have a suspicion that they're probably okay with a bit of critique. And again, I think if you're ever in an interview situation, your prospective employer is looking for whether you buckle immediately under any criticism of your idea. I mean, I can look at this and, instantly you're just like, oh, well, is it a bad thing if it rolls off the table? Is that particular color temperature of light sensitive to, and conducive to bedtime sleeping? I'm just throwing stuff that I don't care whether it is wrong or is right. I want to see whether you emotionally are okay to engage with it. If you come back with an answer that says, oh, actually, yeah, I chose the warmest LED, but yeah, it was kind of annoying me that it rolled off the table, actually. That's why those little ribs are there. Then I'm like, fine, I didn't pay attention to it. Oh, look, yeah, there are ribs. That stops it rolling. The point is, I just don't want to see someone crumple a modest interrogation of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's not that companies, I'm sure back in the 80s or whatever, there was a very sort of, I don't know, Mad Men, aggressive type of, big testosterone in the room. I've never experienced that. And certainly, at Dyson, it wasn't all guys. One of my biggest influences was a female design manager. Absolutely incredible. That wasn't her style at all. She wasn't looking to try and break and humiliate people. She wanted people to be guided to see the necessary critique themselves. So I think, I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but I'm sure that's what she'd also look for if she was hiring. And I think these are just really lovely bits of work. And I think it's worth just underscoring that no employer expects perfection from someone at the beginning of their career, but they do expect curiosity, and they do expect a willingness to engage with different ideas that maybe aren't their own. And I guess if I could just segue off that last point of different perspectives, it's one thing to design stuff when you kind of know your drinks industry, you are taking a punt at the type of bowl you find aesthetically pleasing. But how would you say, just maybe as a sort of closing question, how is it that as you've progressed through your career, you've gone beyond being able to design for things that are, should we say, within sight or appreciation for the world, and designing for alien things to yourself?
So I mean the entire kind of project, if you call it a project, but in Drown is something which was totally new. I mean, number one, we were the triple whammy of two designers. So we've got a founder who invented the product, who's not from an audio background and not from a product design background, who's designed something which is completely unique, that when we had it works functionally. So it delivers what we call tactile audio. It's an earphone which has, if you can see this, I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see me a little larger, but what we call an acoustic seal. So it's a large earphone tip which fits into your ear, but it's silicon and delivers vibration outward to your ear, so it makes a fuller sound, but it also gives you what we call tactile audio. But we didn't know how it worked or why it worked, we just knew it worked. So number one thing was, all right, as two product designers who know nothing about audio, let's try and understand audio, let's try and understand ears, let's try and understand what technology we've got, and let's try and understand how those three things fit together to make something which we can then start to design a product around. When it came to us, it was not a product. Now we've kind of transferred it into a product, something which we can manufacture, something which we can sell and market. But it's a long process which is still continuing. I mean, we still don't fully understand everything behind this product. We know a lot more than we did a year ago, but we'll not know as much as we will do in a year's time. We've got a lot of people that have critiqued it. We've got even more people that love it. So, but for different reasons. And so it's understanding that, number one, audio is very subjective. Different people have different ears. They like different sounds. You're not going to please everyone. Different people with different shaped ears like similar sounds to people with the same shaped ear as them. But also they can hate sounds that you or I might like. And you can't please everyone. That's one of the main kind of underlying points that I've learned through this, is you simply can't please everyone with a product, especially not when it's something as personal and as emotional as audio. When we started this, our kind of main motive, our main drive was to make audio more emotional, which is a strange take for a company to make something more emotional for people when you don't understand their emotions. But if we can make it more emotional for more people, then we've succeeded in kind of our end goal. And with that as a driving force, it's allowed us to kind of position ourselves kind of uniquely as a company which offers something different than a bigger bass or a more kind of noise cancelling. Ours is great at noise cancelling, but that's not why we've done it. Yeah. It's to make it more emotional. It's to make it more personal. So with that as the driving force, it's been a great kind of exploration of different ideas. And it allows you a lot more kind of creative freedom in thinking of things. Well, what would make it more emotional? What would make something a sadder song for me, but also a happier song for a different song? Or, I mean, this product is mainly aimed at the gaming industry for starters. So what gets you into the game more? If it's a shooting game, but also if it's an exploration game, what Zelda versus Call of Duty, the same product gets delivered to those customers, but you want that experience to be amazing on different levels for each one. So, I mean, it being in a foreign, alien kind of topic zone has been a great place to learn and to just explore and to prototype and to make mistakes. But it's also been great to just go out there and meet people who are experts in this and find out what their opinions are and if they like it, if they don't like it. We went to the Edinburgh Festival of Sound and presented there and got amazing feedback from people who were what I would say is audio geeks. They love audio. Their whole life is about audio. My life is about design, and so it's a good kind of a meeting zone for ideas. And everyone was really open there, and it kind of opened up this community for me that I didn't know existed. It was this really tight-knit Edinburgh community of lots of different people that were doing amazing things in the audio industry. And we were just one small company that are a part of that. But together we kind of were hoping that we can push the kind of boundaries on what audio is. So it's a kind of, a snapshot of what kind of life is like at Drown. It's an exploration of, sorry, my rabbit's thumping there. not enjoying my dulcet tones. An exploration on what we think audio is, but we're open to whatever other people think audio is. And audio is always changing. There's new platforms that come out, new sounds. Having our gaming products has kept our focus on what the next generation of PlayStation and Xbox might be, and they're really seriously looking at what audio is going to be in the future and trying to make three-dimensional audio more 3D, if that makes sense. So you've got 7.1 surround sound, but that's only 7 speakers, and you've got an infinite amount of area around you. So it's trying to make things as good as possible for a listener without being intrusive on either their home space or their personal space.
No, I think it's incredibly exciting, and I love that you were just ending on that point of that. You know, I sometimes use the phrase, I like turning up to parties where I wasn't invited. And it feels like you're doing that with the audio geeks. And yeah. I think it's just one last point that's worth just driving home for any graduates or undergraduates watching this is, you know, don't ever be fooled by thinking, you know, you're not entitled to turn up to a particular genre, community or expertise or field. I think it sounds like you're going there with respect, with curiosity, and with something that, you haven't got all the answers, but it's interesting. And that, I think that's enough for people. They're not looking for a mirror. They're looking for, interest and, friction.
And I would always say, feel free to challenge the norm. I mean, the whole reason this product existed was because our founder asked people who did make earphones, "Oh, can you make this?" And they were like, "No, that's not possible." And he was like, "Well, why not? I can see it in my mind. I can prototype it. Why can't you make it?" And they were like, "Oh, it's just not possible." And then started a company, started his own product, even going to manufacturers and being like, "Can you do this?" And they're like, "That's not possible." And they're like, "Well, why can't we just push that envelope a little bit further? Let's see things from our perspective and see how easy it looks in our mind." And then people are often like, "Oh, well, actually, that does work." I mean, one of our components is an impossible to make injection molded piece. So we're using a process called multi-jet fusion, which is mainly a prototyping process, but actually it gives incredible results. So we're using it in our final product because it's impossible to make this piece through conventional means. It's an impossible geometry to make. So that learning about that has opened up so many new avenues for us. Also because we've been almost unwilling to change the design.
Well, but I think that's just a great point to finish on, is just that attitude towards how. I mean, it's just really exciting hearing all these different stories, and it's just such a good, saves me telling people you've managed to show people that prototyping really can help open up exciting new opportunities. So thank you so much, Joe. It's been amazing talking, and here's to online serendipity. So,
yeah, completely. Everyone get adding people that you think you might have a connection with.
Absolutely. Thanks
Thank
again.
you very much, Jude.
Take care. Bye.